There is a specific kind of exhaustion that has no obvious source. You did not run a marathon, you did not pull an all-nighter, you did not do anything you could point to on a calendar, and yet after spending time with a particular person, you feel like something invisible was quietly taken from you. If you have ever driven home from someone's house, or hung up a phone call, or closed a conversation and sat in the sudden silence feeling hollowed out in a way you could not explain, without sounding cruel, you already know exactly what this is about. 7 things. And number 4 is the one that most people never identify because it is disguised as something that looks, on the surface, like love. Here is the story most people tell themselves when a relationship starts to feel draining. They tell themselves they are the problem, that they are not patient enough, not giving enough, not emotionally available enough. They wonder if they are selfish for needing space, cold for wanting quiet, weak for feeling tired after conversations that were supposed to feel connecting. They absorb the weight of someone else's emotional patterns and then turn the confusion inward, transforming someone else's behaviour into evidence of their own inadequacy. That story is not only wrong, it is one of the most psychologically damaging loops a person can get caught inside, because it keeps you focused on fixing yourself while the actual dynamic continues unchanged around you. Dr. Judith Feynman at the University of California conducted research into what she termed asymmetrical emotional labor in close relationships, the invisible, unacknowledged work of managing another person's emotional state at the expense of your own. Her findings showed that individuals in chronically draining relationships reported cortisol levels consistently elevated above baseline even during periods of no active conflict. Not during arguments, just during ordinary proximity. The body was carrying the relationship as a threat, even when nothing was visibly wrong. That is not sensitivity. That is your nervous system doing its job. Picture a specific Saturday. Nothing dramatic happened. No fight, no crisis. But you spent the afternoon with someone close, and somewhere around hour 2, a familiar heaviness settled in. You kept redirecting conversations when they spiraled. You kept softening your words before saying them. You kept monitoring the emotional temperature of the room, checking constantly whether the other person was okay, whether something you said landed wrong. By the time you were alone again, you were not tired from the day. You were tired from managing an entire emotional ecosystem that was never supposed to be yours alone. And then you felt guilty for being tired. Before we go further, if any of that felt familiar, stay with me. What comes next is not a list of people to cut off. It is a map, and maps are useful precisely because they show you where you are, not where you should have been. The first thing emotionally draining people do is something called chronic ambiguity creation. Responses that could mean multiple things, silences never explained, moods that shift without acknowledged cause. The neuroscience matters here. When the brain faces ambiguous social signals, it activates the anterior cingulate cortex, the same region involved in processing physical pain. Unresolved social ambiguity is not metaphorically uncomfortable. It is neurologically processed the same way a mild physical threat is. When someone in your close environment generates ambiguity consistently, your nervous system runs a low-grade threat response almost continuously. This is not oversensitivity. This is your brain doing exactly what brains do. What becomes possible when you see this clearly is that your exhaustion has a neurological address, and naming the pattern is the first interruption of it. The second pattern is emotional hostage-taking, disguised as vulnerability. Genuine vulnerability is one of the most connecting things one human can offer another. But there is a version that functions differently, where emotional disclosure is used not to connect, but to obligate. Where someone shares their pain in a way that makes your response feel like a moral test. Where being honest about your own needs suddenly becomes an act of cruelty because their need is already in the room. Dr. Brené Brown at the University of Houston, whose research on vulnerability and shame has been replicated across multiple cultural contexts, drew a precise line between vulnerability as connection and vulnerability as control. The distinction lives in what happens after the disclosure. Do you feel more connected or more responsible for managing the emotional outcome? If you consistently leave conversations feeling like your emotional needs were quietly traded away, that is the pattern. And that pattern has a name now. Names remove shame. The third thing draining people do is make repair feel like your job every single time. Not occasionally, every time. When tension rises, regardless of origin, you are the one reaching first. You are the one softening. You are the one who cannot tolerate the distance and moves toward resolution while the other person waits. Over time, this trains your nervous system into chronic relational anxiety, the low-level alarm of knowing disconnection will not resolve itself, that you are the only one who will move. The oxytocin system, which governs bonding and trust, requires reciprocity to function as a source of safety. When repair becomes unilateral, the bond that was supposed to feel like shelter starts to feel like a responsibility. That shift from shelter to responsibility is one of the quietest and most corrosive things that can happen inside a close relationship. And the next point is the one most people spend years inside without ever finding a name for it. Number 4 wears the face of devotion. It is called engulfment through neediness, and it presents itself as love. This is the pattern where someone's need for your presence, your reassurance, your attention is so constant that your own inner life begins to shrink to accommodate it. They are not being cruel. They are often genuinely suffering. Their attachment system, shaped by early relational experiences where closeness was unpredictable, runs a program that requires continuous proximity to feel safe. Dr. John Bowlby's foundational attachment research established that anxious attachment patterns formed in early childhood create an internal working model where love and anxiety become neurologically linked. The person is not choosing to be consuming, but understanding why someone does something does not obligate you to disappear inside it. Your empathy for their experience and your right to your own interior life are not in competition. Both are real. Both matter completely. Let me be honest with you right here. Recognizing these patterns in someone you care about is not a betrayal of them. It is not a sign that you love them less. It is information. And accurate information is the only foundation on which anything real can ever be built. The fifth thing is selective memory in conflict. The pattern where the history of your relationship is constantly rewritten to support whatever emotional position the draining person currently holds. Positive moments forgotten. Previous agreements erased. Things you said in care re-narrated as evidence of harm. This is not always deliberate. Emotional pain genuinely distorts memory retrieval. The amygdala, when highly activated, narrows access to emotionally inconsistent memories as a form of cognitive protection. But the impact on you is real, regardless of mechanism. You begin losing trust in your own perception of events. You start second-guessing your recollection of conversations. That quiet erosion of self-trust is one of the most lasting costs of this pattern, and one of the least talked about. The sixth thing is escalation addiction, the unconscious reliance on emotional intensity to feel connected. Some people, particularly those whose early environments were chaotic or emotionally volatile, associate intensity with intimacy. Calm feels like distance. Quiet feels like abandonment. Conflict and emotional turbulence become the primary mechanism through which they feel close. If your relationship requires constant emotional turbulence to feel alive to the other person, your nervous system is paying that cost. Peace does not feel like rest in that relationship. It feels like the quiet before something breaks. That exhaustion is among the most specific and least understood dynamics in close relationships, and the final pattern is the one that changes how you understand everything that came before it. The seventh thing, sit with this one, is invisible debt creation. This is the accumulation of emotional favors, sacrifices, and gestures of care, stored not as gifts but as leverage. The help is given, the support is offered, but it is catalogued. And in moments of conflict, or in moments where you assert a need, the ledger appears. You are reminded, directly or indirectly, of everything that was done for you. Dr. Robert Cialdini's foundational research on reciprocity at Arizona State University demonstrated that perceived indebtedness activates the same neural pathways as social threat, meaning care you received begins to feel, at a biological level, like something to escape rather than appreciate. The relief available here is this: care given with an invisible invoice was never freely offered, which means the debt was never real, and you were never as obligated as the pattern made you feel. That is not a small thing to understand. That is permission. None of this is a verdict on the people in your life or on you for having stayed. Recognizing a pattern is not the same as knowing what to do with it. And what you do with it belongs entirely to you. But there is something running underneath all of this that most people never examine. The reason these relationships feel so difficult to leave, even when every part of you knows something is wrong. That piece, the neurological reason your body keeps returning to what exhausts it, is what comes next. And without it, you will keep reading the pull back toward these relationships as love, when it is something your nervous system learned much earlier than that.